Hi, my name is Shoma Jurgensen. I'm a business owner and instructor of business, and I am excited to talk about the next installment in the strategic planning process, looking at your external environment both to scan and to analyze it in the next step of strategic management. So let's continue our analogy of strategic management being like Google Maps. If that is true, then scanning and analyzing your external environment is a lot like finding the most direct route to growth for your business, but the scanning is about looking for roadblocks, traffic, detours, and ultimately choosing the alternate route that best fits the needs of your business. So external scanning, what is it? What's the process? Where do you start? First of all is to understand your environment in terms of some commonly understood categories. And then have a system to scan them each in turn to make sure you're not missing critical information or resources. And then turn your scan into an analysis. In early study of strategic planning, often students of the discipline will stop at the SWOT analysis, but there's more to be done in analyzing where you are with your external environment. And why do you do this? What is the importance of this process? We are striving, all of us, to be business leaders, not business reactors. And particularly for small businesses, it can be difficult to understand how to get out of the day-to-day of your internal environment, the processing of tasks, and start to plot a path for success for your business in the future. So that's why external scanning is so important. And let's take a look at a couple of perspectives as they're described in the text Strategic Management in Action by Mary Coulter. There's two ways to look at your external environment. One is a source of information where you're gathering research, trends, etc. to understand how they might impact your business in the future. And the other is to look at the resources that are available in your external environment, the competition for that resources, and how to best use them to your business's advantage. This resources perspective is a bit closer to Porter's 5 forces process, which we'll look at in another video. So if we look at an organization as what's called an open system, all right, that this information and resources flow in and out of our business and our activities. The organization, as you'll see here, is surrounded by an external environment. All right. This environment consists of resources, inputs like physical resources, capital, human, and information resources. So not only those that you control, but those outside of your organization's control. And then your business expertise comes in the processes. How do you plan your functional strategies to take advantage of the resources, both informational and more physical resources that come from the external environment? How do you plan, organize, lead, and control your business through this process for the ultimate wealth creation activity of creating outputs? So the goods, the services, performance measures that are a result of these performances or these processes. And you'll note then these outputs go back into the environment, which in and of themselves change the environment, and the feedback loop starts again. So the environment, the surrounding feedback arrow, is tremendously important to an organization, but where do we spend most of our time? In the box. So now today is our literally we are thinking outside of the box. Okay, so how do we do that? And of course then I use circles. So an external environment, let's take a look at it in 2 layers. Now, I am going to speak to some of my business students in this case because different business books, they start to change a little bit what falls under what definition, and I want to point that out to my students. But if we look at the task environment, sometimes this is called the industry-specific environment, but I want to address some of the things that fall into this category. First is the labor market. This is often left out of some textbooks on strategic management, but it's an important piece of your strategy. Competitors, we're going to look at competitors as a much more specific and in-depth analysis in the Strategic Management series because it deserves it. And in this case, we will look at Porter's 5 forces in the next video. We'll look at our suppliers, what is supplied, our relationship with them, and then our customer preferences or consumer preferences. For my students, in the case of strategic management in action, customer preferences and socio-cultural trends are being talked about in the same way. In introductory texts, you will find socio-cultural actually being talked about more as demographics in the general environment. So I just wanted to point out that difference. When we talk in this video about socio-cultural, we're talking about customer trends and preferences. Right? But otherwise, we have this external environment, general external. And what is the difference? In this little mini circle is our internal environment. That's our box, that's our organization. As we move to further circles on the outside, our impact from information in that environment becomes less direct. All right, so our customers' preferences, a little bit more direct. We're a little closer to make decisions on how we'll react to that. However, these external general environment are typically very indirect and require more future planning or more critical thought into how it will impact our business in the internal environment. Okay. And you might say, okay, well, we've got technological, economic, demographic, and political legal, each of which I'll talk about in a little bit more detail soon. But where is global? And this is why I believe that global is not one of these specific external general environments. That's because they are all of the general external environments. We can no longer have a category for global where there is an option not to look at it. When you look at technological advances, you simply have to look at your host country as well as those outside of your host country. Same with political, legal, demographic, and economic. It really is imperative that your global perspective be far more holistic than a category in your external environment. So let's take a look at our task environment, that is a little bit more close to the decisions we'd make internally. So customers and sociocultural, this is where it's important to understand consumer behavior. And there's a lot of secondary research that is involved with this, as well as primary research that bigger companies can do or get a hold of. But essentially this category is about what are our customers doing, why, what's changing in their behavior, their attitudes, why are they making these changes? What is impacting how they decide between me and another company in terms of their purchasing behaviors? Are they buying more of something in a different way? Why? The why question is always critically important. So that's that category. You can also look at suppliers. Right? Are suppliers merging together, in which case they have more bargaining power, and we will go into that a little bit more in Porter's 5. But what about your relationship with suppliers? If you have a strong relationship with a supplier, there might be more concessions that you can get that can help make internal decisions. But just as important, what are your suppliers supplying? What's available to them? How is their environment changing? Because that can impact your internal decisions. The labor market, this is not the same as making HR decisions, which falls into your internal environment, that completely under your organization's control. But what is happening in the overall labor market that might impact how you plan your functional strategies in HR? And then there's competitors, and again I have this circled because we will go into much more detail in Porter's 5 forces. But the very first step is to understand who are your competitors, how are you defining that set, and what do you know about them. All right, that's the most basic scan, but we will look at Porter's 5 in the next video in this installment. Right? So these are 4 categories that should be part of your external environment scan before you start your analysis. Now let's look at the general external environment. All right? We have technological, and that is, in this case, what technologies are being used, what emerging technologies are there, what sunsetting technologies are there. Someone brought up, typewriters, no longer in practice, cassette tapes. You might find there are particular technologies that are exiting the market, which is just as important to look at as those technologies that are emerging in the market, not only on our shores, but those of other nations as well. Economic. It is not enough to say economic times are good or bad. Look at the full economic spectrum. What's going on with GDP, not only unemployment. Let's take a look at the consumer price index. Those are more macroeconomic trends. But what about microeconomics? What's happening with salaries? What's happening with growth with particular industries or retailers? How might that impact what I do in my business? And then there's demographic, and as I mentioned to my business students, early texts will talk about demographic and sociocultural together. In this case, we are splitting them up. So what is happening with the demography in your in your country? What groups are growing? Take a look at age, ethnicity, growth rates. Where do they live? Why are they moving there? What about education, household, stage of household? Are they empty nesters? What does that mean for you? How many are in your zip code? How many are in your state or province? How many are in your country? Okay, and so this is scanning at this point, all right? And then political and legal. I think right now in the U.S., the big buzz is over the Affordable Care Act. There's always something. If you're a defense contractor, you might be looking at things like how Don't Ask, Don't Tell has affected your business, how military contractors and any regulations around that affect your business. So it's important to look at both the private and the public sector when you're examining political and legal trends and research in the environment. All right, again, I just want to remind you that global is everywhere, right? So don't separate it as a category, but think outside the bounds of your country, your host country, in order to determine what your best steps might be. All right, so now that we understand what these categories are, let's take a look at the need for consistency in your planning. Now this again, it's a little snippet out of the text in Chapter 3 of Strategic Management in Action. And I wanted to bring up these numbers just to show you, first of all, this first bullet point about how much online business is done. Over half their marketing and sales were done online. Half of consumers, these respondents are consumers, so we're looking at the customer environment. 40% of employers, all right, we're looking at the labor market. European country labor market, so this is an example of global overlaying labor market. 80% of consumers, all right, this is a consumer trend. We're concerned with online identity theft and internet fraud, therefore our behaviors will change. 75% of teens, all right, what their attitudes, their behaviors are. It's a customer trend. We look at births, deaths, immigration, and emigration of new Americans. That's a demographic trend. And these last two are both customer and technological trends. So 80% of home buyers use the internet to help find a home. Public access to consumers of MLS listings is pretty new comparatively. And by 2010, 2/3 of all payments will be virtual. Okay, so this ability is an emerging technological trend as well as a customer preference. Now, if this were the first step of any client that I had or student, my first question would be, well, did you consider economic, suppliers, and political and legal? I don't see them here. Again, I'm leaving out competitor because we will do a complete analysis on that later. But that's what I mean by scanning needing consistency. If my customer client can tell me, yes, they did an economic analysis and didn't find anything substantive that they wanted to include, great. Same with suppliers and political and legal. Now, I'd probably say, really, there's nothing with political, legal, or economic. I might push back on that a little bit. But the point here is to consistently go through each of the categories and ensure that you've done at least some research to let you know if these are trends you want to consider in these categories or not. Now again, this is scanning at this stage, not analysis. This research takes a long time, but you're not done. All right, so when we take scanning to analysis, this is just one tool that I use that I wanted to share with you, okay? And I know it seems elementary relatively, but I find that the more I think through each stage of what I'm doing, the better analysis I can achieve. So first of all, what was my research? What trend did I find? And I'll use this chart to organize my research. And then where did I find it? Because if your boss is not asking you, or your financial institution, or your investors or owners, where you got the information, is it valid? How current, relevant is it? How did you use your information literacy skills to determine if this research is valid and reliable? Then you're not being pushed hard enough, okay? And then what environment does it impact? Now this is the process piece. If I go through this and I see only 2 environments, then I need to make some additional effort to ensure that I'm addressing others. Now here's the analysis piece. Right? How can it be an opportunity? Maybe it can, maybe it can't, but did I think it through? Or how can it be a threat? All right, and a check mark is not enough here. I'm saying, how can it be a threat? So if I've determined it as a threat, how is it a threat? All right, and in this way, you are able to take that next step in your analysis process. I hope you find this helpful. Very simple table in a Word document, okay? So what did we do in this video? We talked about knowing our environment and our categories, having a system to scan them each in turn, and then turning that scan into an analysis. Thank you very much for taking time to understand external scanning and analysis in the strategic planning process.